Welcome back. Let everything quiet down, and we'll ease into a slow tale from Norse mythology. The night comes early in the north. Not all at once, but gradually. First, a dimming at the edges of the sky, then a thickening of shadow along the tree line, then the long, slow blue that settles over land and water alike. In winter, the darkness arrives before the day feels finished. In summer, it lingers just beyond the horizon, never fully gone, as if watching. In such a world, stories are not a luxury, they are shelter. Picture a longhouse lit by firelight. Smoke curls upward and disappears into the rafters. Outside, wind presses against timber walls, and somewhere beyond the fields, the forest breathes. The people inside know that the land is not empty. It never has been. Mountains have moods. The sea remembers. The dead do not always stay where they are placed. This is the world that gave birth to Norse monsters. They are not jump scares or simple villains. They are not mistakes in an otherwise orderly universe. They are part of how the universe works. In Norse mythology, monsters belong here just as much as gods, humans, and animals do. They gnaw at the roots of the world, coil around its edges, haunt its burial mounds, and press in at its borders. They are reminders, quiet or catastrophic, that order is temporary and that survival is never guaranteed. Before we meet them, we need to understand what the word monster actually means in a Norse context. Modern storytelling often treats monsters as things that should not exist. They are accidents, curses, or aberrations, creatures to be destroyed so the world can return to normal. Norse mythology does not think this way. Here, monsters are expected. They are woven into prophecy. They occupy necessary positions in the structure of reality. Some are born monstrous. Others become monstrous through greed, hunger, or isolation. Many are frightening not because they are evil, but because they are inevitable. A Norse monster is often defined by at least one of three qualities. First, scale. Some beings are simply too large, too powerful, or too old for the human world to safely contain. A serpent that circles the entire earth. A wolf whose jaws can swallow the sky. A creature beneath the world tree that never stops chewing. Their size alone makes them dangerous, not through malice, but through presence. Second, boundary breaking. Many Norse monsters live at thresholds, shorelines, cave mouths, grave mounds, forests, and the borders between realms. They cross lines that humans and gods prefer to keep firm: life and death, land and sea, order and chaos. A draugr walks when it should lie still. A shape-changer wears another body as easily as clothing. A night spirit enters a sleeper's chest without ever opening a door. Third, fate entanglement. Perhaps most unsettling of all, many monsters cannot be permanently defeated. They are tied to what must happen. They appear in prophecies not as possibilities, but as certainties. Attempts to restrain them may work for a time, but those attempts often create the very conditions that allow disaster to unfold later. In this way, Norse monsters are not external threats, they are stress points in the cosmos itself. One of the most striking features of Norse myth is how closely monsters and gods are related. They share bloodlines, they intermarry. They bargain, trade insults, exchange knowledge, and occasionally raise children together. The line between god and monster is thinner than it appears, and it shifts depending on perspective. A being may be monstrous to humans but useful to the gods. Another may be feared by the gods but tolerated by the world. Some monsters are not hostile at all until they are provoked, or bound, imprisoned, or denied a place in the cosmic order. This closeness creates a particular kind of unease. The danger is not distant, it is familiar, it may even be necessary. When Norse stories speak of monsters, they are often speaking about forces that cannot be wished away: hunger, cold, decay, greed, the sea, death. These are not moral failings, they are conditions of existence. The monster gives these forces a face. To understand Norse monsters, we must understand the world they inhabit. This is not a smooth, modern globe with clean borders and mapped coastlines. It is a layered, living structure, part geography, part organism, part fate machine. At its center stands a great ash tree, whose branches stretch over the heavens and whose roots reach into deep, cold places. Realms cluster around it, stacked, connected, and overlapping. Rivers run not only with water, but with venom and memory. Wells hold wisdom, fate, and decay. In such a world, monsters are not out of place. A creature that gnaws at the roots of the world tree is doing what it has always done. A serpent in the ocean simply grows to fit the size of the fear it represents. The dead rise not because the world is broken, but because the boundary between life and death is thinner than people would like to believe. The Norse cosmos is held together, but only just. Monsters test its seams. Our knowledge of these beings comes from a small number of fragile sources. Most of what we know about Norse mythology was written down centuries after the stories were first told, preserved by Christian authors working from older poems, oral traditions, and fading cultural memory. The two most important collections, the poetic verses often called the Poetic Edda, and the prose retellings attributed to a medieval Icelandic writer, do not always agree with each other. Details shift, descriptions contradict. Some monsters appear only once, briefly, and then vanish from the record. This uncertainty matters. When a detail is missing, later storytellers sometimes filled the gap. Over time, folklore layered itself over myth. Local legends reshaped older beings. A mountain giant in one region became a troll in another. A nightmare spirit took on new habits and new names. In this series, when we step beyond the earliest sources, we will do so carefully. Later traditions will be identified as such. Speculation will be labeled clearly. Where the sources fall silent, we will pause rather than invent. Silence, after all, is part of the atmosphere. It is difficult to overstate how much environment shapes these stories. The North is not gentle. Winters are long. Crops fail. Storms arrive without warning. The sea feeds and kills with equal indifference. A single bad season can erase a family line. In this setting, fear is practical. You fear the dark because predators hunt there. You fear the cold because it steals strength quietly. You fear the sea because it does not care how skilled you are. Norse monsters embody these fears, but they do not exaggerate them. If anything, they give them structure, a name, a story, something you can talk about by the fire. A draugr explains why certain burial mounds should not be disturbed. A sea monster explains why ships vanish. A night spirit explains why sleep sometimes feels dangerous. These explanations do not remove fear. They make it manageable. Many Norse monsters carry lessons, though rarely comforting ones. They warn against hoarding wealth. They show the cost of broken oaths. They illustrate what happens when hunger goes unchecked or when power is pursued without restraint. But they are not moral pamphlets. A monster does not appear to correct human behavior in a neat, instructive way. It appears because something has reached a breaking point. Greed has hardened into obsession. Death has been denied too long. A boundary has been crossed too many times. The lesson, if there is one, is discovered afterward, often too late. This story will move slowly. We will not rush from creature to creature as if ticking boxes in a catalog. Each monster deserves space, space to exist in its environment, space to be feared, misunderstood, and contemplated. Some sections will feel vast and cosmic. Others will narrow in close, to a single farm, a single grave, a single sleeping body. Together, they form a portrait of a world that does not promise safety, only continuity. Before wolves break chains, before serpents churn the sea, before the dead walk and the roots of the world are gnawed thin, we begin here, in the dark, with the fire burning low. Because this is where Norse monsters live best. Not in screams, but in quiet understanding. Not as interruptions, but as reminders. They are coming. They have always been here. And as long as the world stands, even barely, they will remain part of it. Settle in. The stories are older than fear, and the night is long. Before we speak of specific creatures, before wolves strain at chains or serpents stir the sea, we need to understand the world that holds them. In Norse mythology, monsters do not wander through empty space. They live in a cosmos that is layered, tense, and alive, a structure that feels less like a map and more like a body. Everything rests within this living framework, and every monster draws its meaning from where it dwells. The Norse world is not round and complete. It is vertical, knotted, and strained. Realms press against one another. Boundaries exist, but they are thin. What separates safety from danger is often no more than a river, a shoreline, a tree root, or a burial mound. At the center of it all stands a great ash tree older than memory, holding worlds together by sheer endurance. Its branches stretch upward into light, while its roots push downward into cold, mist, and rot. Life and decay are not opposites here, they are neighbors. This matters because monsters gather where tension gathers. They live beneath roots, along coasts, at the edges of forests, in mountains that cast long shadows, and in halls that no living guest enters by choice. They are shaped by these places, and in turn, they shape how those places are feared. The idea of a realm in Norse mythology does not mean a sealed world. It means a region of influence, a mood, a way that reality behaves when you cross a certain threshold. When a traveler leaves a farm and enters the forest, the rules change. When a ship loses sight of land, the sea becomes something else entirely. When a body is laid in a mound and the earth is sealed, a door is closed, but not always locked. These transitions are where monsters feel closest. The sea, in particular, holds a special place in Norse fear. It is not simply water, it is distance made physical. Once a ship leaves the shore, it enters a space that humans do not control. Storms rise without warning. Currents pull without explanation. Creatures move beneath the surface, unseen and immense. To live near the sea is to accept that something vast watches from below. Monsters of the deep do not need to attack often to inspire dread. Their size alone is enough. The idea that the water beneath a hull might not be empty, that it might be alive and aware, is a fear that settles quietly into the bones. The shoreline becomes a line of safety not because it is secure, but because it is familiar. Step beyond it, and the world opens into something indifferent. Forests carry a different kind of danger. They are close, constant, and enclosing. Trees block sight, sounds travel strangely. Paths shift with snow, rain, and time. A forest does not announce what lives within it. Here, monsters are not vast, they are hidden. They watch, they wait. They wear shapes that blur into bark, shadow, and fur. In these places, it is not size that terrifies, but uncertainty. You cannot see what moves beside you. You cannot tell how close it is. You cannot be sure you are alone. Mountains, too, inspire their own strain of fear. They rise abruptly from the land, jagged and indifferent. Avalanches, rock slides, and sudden storms make them lethal without intention. To imagine them as inhabited, to believe that something ancient sleeps within stone, is not a stretch. It is a way of making sense of a place that feels hostile to human life. Burial grounds occupy a quieter space, but perhaps the most unsettling of all. They are not distant. They sit near farms, paths, and settlements. They remind the living that the dead are close, and that memory does not always fade cleanly. In Norse belief, death is not a clean severing. The body matters. The place of burial matters. The way a person lived matters. When something goes wrong, when greed, violence, or unfinished business lingers, the boundary weakens. A monster that rises from a mound is not invading from elsewhere. It is emerging from within the community itself. This is why Norse monsters often feel intimate. They are not strangers from another world. They are neighbors transformed by circumstance. Below all of this lies the cold understructure of the cosmos. Deep places of mist, ice, and darkness support everything above them. They are not evil, but they are inhospitable. Cold preserves and destroys at the same time. It slows decay while draining warmth. In such regions, creatures do not thrive. They endure. Monsters born or dwelling here are shaped by scarcity. Hunger defines them. So does patience. Time stretches differently in cold, dark places, and beings that live there learn to wait. Even the great world tree itself is not safe. It is bitten, chewed, scratched, gnawed upon endlessly by creatures that never sleep. This is not presented as an anomaly, but as a fact of existence. The structure of reality is under constant pressure, and the monsters beneath it are part of that pressure. The gods know this. They do not imagine a perfect, eternal order. They know the world will fail eventually. Their halls are built with that knowledge in mind. Their actions are shaped by delay, mitigation, and temporary balance. Monsters represent the costs of that balance. Some are locked away, some are tolerated. Some are allowed to grow because there is no better option. Every choice strengthens one boundary while weakening another. From a human perspective, this creates a world that feels watchful. Not cruel, but alert. Every place carries the sense that something could happen if the rules are broken or if luck turns. This awareness encourages caution, respect, and ritual. It explains why certain places are avoided at night, why some waters are not fished, why some mounds are left untouched. These are not superstitions born of ignorance. They are strategies for survival in a world that does not promise mercy. Monsters, then, are not random threats scattered across the landscape. They are anchored. Each one belongs somewhere, and knowing that place, truly knowing it, means understanding where danger lives and where it does not. As we move forward, keep this structure in mind. When we meet a wolf, consider what it means that it runs free beneath the sky. When we meet a serpent, remember the sea that hides it. When we meet the dead, think of the earth that was supposed to hold them still. Nothing in this world exists alone. The monsters are shaped by their homes, and their homes are shaped by fear. The paths outward are many, and some of them lead straight into the dark. There are certain kinds of fear that do not shout. They do not arrive as a sudden shock, but as a slow understanding, an awareness that something is growing beyond your control and that no amount of planning will truly stop it. In Norse mythology, that fear takes the shape of a wolf. Not a common wolf, not the wary animal that keeps to the tree line and steals a lamb if hunger wins. This wolf is larger than the stories can comfortably hold. It is born into prophecy. It is measured not by paws and teeth, but by consequence. Its name is Fenrir. Even saying it feels like setting something in motion. In the old tales, the gods learn early that a great wolf will one day become their enemy. They hear it in prophecy, in the weight of fate that settles over the world long before the world understands what is coming. The gods are not strangers to violence, but they are strangers to helplessness. And what they are told about Fenrir is not merely that he will fight. It is that he will win something. He will take a piece of the future with him. So they do what powerful beings often do when faced with an unpleasant certainty. They try to manage it. Fenrir is young at first, but he grows quickly. The stories do not linger on the gentleness of a puppy or the clumsy innocence of youth. They emphasize growth. Fast, relentless, unmistakable. Each day his bones stretch. His shoulders broaden, his breath becomes heavier, his hunger becomes less like an appetite and more like a force. And the gods keep him close. This detail is easy to overlook, but it matters. They do not leave him far away, in some distant wilderness. They do not destroy him in infancy. They keep him among them, within the walls of their own stronghold, as if proximity might translate into control. A creature raised in your hall feels easier to predict. A threat you can see feels safer than one you can't. So Fenrir grows in the presence of gods. He learns their voices, their habits, the rhythm of their confidence. He listens to them speak of order and duty, of rules and honor. He watches them act as if they can bargain with fate. And the gods in return watch him. They watch his eyes. They watch his jawline lengthen. They watch the way his body seems to gather power, the way a storm gathers pressure. Most of them keep their distance. Only one is brave enough, or foolish enough, to approach. Tyr. In the oldest stories, Tyr is a god associated with law, oaths, and the kind of courage that isn't loud. The kind that isn't about charging into battle for glory, but about standing firm when fear would rather you move away. It is Tyr who feeds Fenrir. This is not a small act. It is intimate. It is a daily choice to approach what everyone else avoids. It also creates something rare between a god and a monster. Familiarity. Fenrir is not a mindless beast in these stories. He is intelligent. He understands patterns. He understands who comes close and who does not. He understands that Tyr's hand is the one that brings food. And perhaps, for a time, he understands it as trust. But trust does not cancel prophecy. The gods decide that they cannot let Fenrir continue to grow unbound. They tell themselves this is wisdom. They tell themselves it is necessary. And maybe it is. Yet the way they do it reveals a deeper truth. The gods fear not only Fenrir's strength, but the possibility that they will one day face something they cannot undo. They begin with chains. Not metaphors, not gentle restraints, real iron, heavy and thick. They bring it to the wolf as if it is a game. The stories are careful with this moment. They show the gods trying to persuade Fenrir to accept a test, to let himself be bound as a demonstration of strength. They flatter him. They speak as though they admire him. And Fenrir, who understands more than they want to admit, agrees. Perhaps he agrees because he believes he can break anything they put on him. Perhaps he agrees because he wants to learn what they will do. Perhaps, at this early stage, he still wants to play along. The chain is placed. The gods step back. Fenrir tenses. And with one violent movement, the iron snaps. It is not a struggle. It is not a long, dramatic tearing. It is a simple fact. What they brought is not enough. The gods gather again, and they make a new chain. Thicker. Stronger. The kind of binding that would hold a giant. They return to Fenrir and repeat the same pattern. They ask him to let himself be bound. They frame it as a challenge. This time, he hesitates. A creature does not need to be wise to recognize a trap when the trap repeats. But again, he agrees. The chain closes. The gods step back. Fenrir gathers himself. And again, the iron shatters. The sound of it is described as if it is part of the world breaking, metal bursting, links flying, the air trembling with the release. The gods realize something that should have been obvious from the beginning. This wolf is not meant to be contained by ordinary means. And so they turn to a different kind of solution. They seek something not from their own hands, but from the craftsmen of the deep earth, the ones who can make objects that behave like ideas. The dwarves. The binding they create is not a chain as humans would understand it. It is a ribbon. Soft. Light, almost delicate. In the stories, it is called Gleipnir. At first glance, it looks harmless, like silk, like a band of woven cloth, something you could loop around a wrist and forget. Fenrir sees it and immediately becomes suspicious. He has snapped heavy iron. He has destroyed what the gods forged with effort and pride. And now they offer him a ribbon. He is not fooled. He demands proof. But how do you prove a spell that is designed to feel like nothing? How do you demonstrate the strength of something that does not look strong? The gods attempt persuasion again. They speak of honor. They speak of courage. They insist that if Fenrir truly believes in his own power, he has nothing to fear. Fenrir's reply is simple, and it carries the cold clarity of an animal that has learned the shape of betrayal. He will allow it, but only if one of them places a hand in his mouth. A pledge. A guarantee. If this ribbon is harmless, then the hand will remain untouched. If it is a trap, then the gods will pay. The hall grows quiet in the imagination, because this is the moment where everything becomes real. A test is no longer a game when it demands a price. The gods look at one another. None of them move. It is not that they do not understand the stakes. They understand them perfectly. They simply do not want to be the one to lose. And then Tyr steps forward. He has been the one closest to the wolf. He has been the one who fed him. He has been the one who acted as if trust could exist alongside fear. Now, when trust is demanded in return, he is the only one willing to offer it. Tyr places his hand in Fenrir's mouth. It is not described as a dramatic flourish, it is described as a decision. The ribbon is wrapped. Gleipnir closes. Fenrir strains. He tries to break it the way he broke the chains. He pulls, he twists. He gathers his strength and throws it against the binding. Nothing. The ribbon holds. This is the most terrifying moment of the story from Fenrir's perspective. To be powerful, to be growing, to believe in your own strength, and then to discover that you are restrained by something you cannot even understand. The gods step back. Fenrir realizes what has been done. And in that realization, trust dies. He bites down. Tyr's hand is taken. This is often told as a moment of heroism for Tyr, a sacrifice made for the safety of the world. But it is also a moment of betrayal. A creature that was raised among the gods, fed by one of them, and treated as a living danger rather than a living being, learns the truth. The gods never intended to allow him freedom. The gods intended only delay. Fenrir is anchored. In some tellings, he is bound to a stone. In others, a sword is placed in his mouth to keep his jaws open, and his drool becomes a river. These images are not merely decorative. They show what it means to hold a monster in place. It is not clean. It is not gentle. It is a constant act of restraint that requires cruelty to maintain. And still, the binding is not presented as permanent. It is presented as temporary. The gods do not believe they have solved the problem. They believe they have postponed it. This is the heart of Fenrir's story. The wolf is not frightening only because of what he will do later. He is frightening because the gods, in trying to prevent prophecy, behave in ways that make prophecy more certain. They teach the monster the language of betrayal. They give him a reason to hate. They build a future in which trust between gods and monsters becomes impossible. And then they call it wisdom. Fenrir becomes a symbol of the unstoppable, but not in the way a storm is unstoppable. A storm does not remember. A storm does not learn. Fenrir is unstoppable because he is bound to fate, and because he has been shaped into the very thing the gods feared. There is another, quieter dimension to this story. Fenrir is also a lesson in what restraint costs. The gods treat binding as a technical problem. They seek stronger materials, better craftsmanship, cleverer solutions. But the cost is not in the metal. The cost is in the relationship. When you restrain a living being through deception, you destroy the possibility of peace. You create an enemy where there might have been something else. In a world where oaths are sacred, the breaking of trust is not a small sin, it is the kind of fracture that spreads. And so the wolf waits, bound, breathing, feeling the tension of the ribbon that holds him and the certainty that one day it will fail. Outside, the world continues. Seasons turn. Ships cross seas. Children are born and grow old. And beneath the surface of time, the monster remains. Because in Norse myth, the most frightening creatures are not always the ones that roam. Sometimes, the most frightening are the ones you have already trapped. The ones you must remember. The ones you must keep bound. Because if you ever stop paying attention, if you ever assume the world is safe, then the chain you built with fear will loosen, and the future will come rushing in. There's a kind of fear that belongs only to the sea. It does not rush toward you. It does not announce itself with footsteps or breath. It waits beneath a surface that looks calm, even generous, and it allows you to forget, just for a moment, how small you are. For the Norse world, the sea was not an edge. It was a ring. Beyond the last visible shore, beyond the furthest familiar route, the ocean wrapped itself around the land like a living boundary. It fed villages and swallowed ships. It connected distant worlds and erased the careless. To sail was to trust that the water beneath you would remain merely water. But in the old stories, it was never only that. Something lived there. Not in a single bay or trench, but everywhere at once, stretched thin around the world itself. A presence so vast that it could not rise fully without unmaking what it surrounded. This is the Midgard serpent, Jörmungandr. He is not described as clever or cunning. He does not speak riddles or bargain for freedom. His terror lies in scale and inevitability. He exists as a fact of the world, like gravity or the horizon. The stories say he was cast into the sea while still young, flung outward to the edges of the human world. There he grew, and he did not stop. He grew until his body circled the land entirely, until his own length became a boundary, until his tail met his mouth, and the world was enclosed within his coils. This image is easy to gloss over, but it is one of the most unsettling in Norse myth. The serpent is not merely near the world. He defines it. Every shoreline becomes a reminder of what lies just beyond sight. Every voyage carries the unspoken knowledge that the water below is not empty. It is occupied. The serpent's presence turns the sea into a living threshold. Cross it too carelessly, and you may not return. The gods understand this, even if humans do not. Unlike the wolf bound on land, the serpent is left where he is. There is no attempt to chain him, no effort to draw him out and contain him. The sea is too vast. The risk is too great. So they watch. And sometimes they test. There is one encounter that brings the serpent closest to the surface, close enough for a human-scaled story to touch something cosmic. It begins, as many Norse tales do, with a journey. A god travels with a giant across harsh land and harsher sea. The giant is a fisherman, experienced and cautious, aware of what the ocean can take from those who underestimate it. The god is stronger, louder, and less inclined to accept limits. When they push out from shore, the water darkens beneath them, the land recedes, the familiar disappears. The giant wishes to fish closer in. The god insists they go farther. This disagreement matters. Distance from shore is not just geography, it is safety measured in hope. The farther they go, the thinner the margin becomes. When they finally stop, the sea beneath them feels heavy. The line sinks deep, carrying bait meant for something far larger than any ordinary catch. An ox's head. The hook drops. Below, something stirs. The stories describe the moment with a tension that stretches the imagination. The line pulls tight. The boat shudders. The sea itself seems to resist, as if reluctant to release what has been caught. When the serpent bites, the world reacts. Waves rise. The sky darkens. The pull on the line is no longer a tug. It is a contest between a god's strength and the mass of the ocean. For a moment, the Midgard serpent is drawn upward. Not fully, not even close, but enough. Enough for his coils to shift. Enough for the sea to reveal that it has been holding something immense. This is not a heroic moment in the modern sense. There is no triumph in it. There is only strain. The giant panics. He understands what is happening more clearly than the god does. He sees the risk not as a challenge, but as an ending. If the serpent rises too far, the balance of the world may break. And so he acts. The line is cut. The serpent sinks back into the depths, the tension releases, and the sea closes over him as if nothing happened. The god is furious, but the world remains intact. This moment reveals something important about the serpent. He is not meant to be fought under fair conditions. He is not meant to be slain casually or early. His role is not as an opponent to be overcome, but as a limit. To pull him fully from the sea would be to invite catastrophe. In this way, the Midgard serpent embodies a particular kind of dread. He represents the danger of going too far, the danger of testing boundaries simply because you can, the danger of forgetting that some things exist to hold the world in place, not to be challenged. For humans, this lesson is quieter, but no less powerful. Sailors did not need to believe they would literally hook a world serpent to fear the deep. The myth gave shape to a reality they already knew. The sea is vast, indifferent, and capable of swallowing the strongest vessel without explanation. The serpent gives that reality a spine. He coils beneath storms, he shifts beneath currents. He sleeps while ships pass above him, unaware of how close they are to something that could end them without effort. There is no hatred in this. There is no hunger for destruction. There is only presence. The Midgard serpent does not chase ships. He does not rise to punish arrogance on a daily basis. He waits, encircling the world, holding tension like a drawn bow. This makes him one of the most purely monstrous beings in Norse mythology. Not because he is cruel, but because he cannot be reasoned with, escaped, or outgrown. He is as large as the world allows him to be, and that is large enough. For now. The sea grows calm again. The boat turns back toward shore. And beneath the surface, the serpent settles, the world still held fast within his endless, patient coil. Some monsters do not hunt. They do not rush from the dark with teeth bared. They do not need to. They are older than pursuit. They are patient. They work the way rust works, slowly, quietly, without pause, until a structure that once seemed solid begins to fail. In Norse mythology, that kind of monster lives beneath the world. Not far beneath, not in some abstract void, but under the roots of the great tree that holds the realms together. If the cosmos is a living thing, then the roots are its bones and nerves, and what happens there matters everywhere. There, in the cold underside, is a creature whose name feels like a rasp against wood. Draugr. He is not described in a way that makes him easy to picture as a single animal. Sometimes he is imagined as a dragon, sometimes as a serpent, sometimes as something that is simply a gnawer. The stories focus less on his exact shape and more on his function. He gnaws. Always. At the roots. That one repeated act, teeth against living wood, turns him into a kind of cosmic corrosion. He does not have to topple the world in a dramatic moment. He only has to continue. And in the imagination of the North, that is frightening enough. To understand why, you have to feel the world tree as more than a symbol. It is not merely a poetic image. It is architecture. The realms do not float freely. They cling. They are held. They are supported by something that can be injured. The tree is described as immense, but also vulnerable. It drinks from wells. It is fed by deep waters. It is tended and faded and pressured from all sides. Birds perch in its branches. Creatures run along its trunk. Things live in it the way things live in a landscape. And beneath, something chews. The most unsettling part is that the gnawing is not treated as a sudden emergency. It is treated as normal, as if the world has always been under strain, as if stability is not a permanent state, but an ongoing effort. a balance held by constant tension. In that sense, Draugr is not a monster you meet. He is a monster you live above. You wake each day under a sky that seems steady, and you do not see the teeth working below. The myths sometimes place other beings near him, not as companions, but as part of the same ecosystem of pressure. There are serpents in the roots. There are creatures that drink from forbidden streams. There is the sense that the underside of the cosmos is busy with forces humans rarely consider: decay, punishment, resentment, unfinished consequences. Above, the gods build halls and speak of honor. Below, the world is being worn down. There is also a strange messenger within this vertical world, a small creature that travels the length of the tree. A squirrel, draugr. In many tellings, draugr runs up and down the trunk, carrying insults between the eagle in the branches and Draugr below. It is an odd detail, almost humorous at first, but it reveals something sharp. Conflict is not confined to the battlefield. It travels. Words have weight. Resentment does not stay where it is born. A small messenger can keep hostility alive by delivering it faithfully, over and over, until it becomes part of the world's routine. In this way, Draugr is not only a gnawer of roots, he is also a receiver. He is fed not just by wood, but by bitterness. By the constant exchange of grievance that echoes through the structure of reality. Then, in some of the darker images of Norse myth, the creature is connected to a place that feels like the shoreline of moral consequence. A dead shore. Nastrond. This is not a landscape of heroic struggle. It is a landscape of aftermath. It is described in terms that feel cold and sour, a shore where venom drips, where serpents twist, where wrongdoing is not met with a dramatic punishment, but with an environment that embodies the result. In this place, the monster does not need to roar. The air does it for him. The very setting is hostile. Draugr appears here as well, tied to the dead and to the consequences that cling to certain kinds of betrayal. The myths do not always present these details with the clarity modern readers want. They hint, they gesture. They allow the imagination to fill in what the text keeps distant. But the emotional shape is consistent. There are actions that damage the world. Not only the world in a cosmic sense, but the world as a lived network of trust. And those actions leave residue. The residue collects below. It becomes part of the underside. It feeds the gnawer. This is what makes Draugr especially unsettling. He represents a kind of threat that is not defeated by strength. You cannot strike him down in the way you strike down a raider. Even if a hero could reach the roots of the world tree, the act of gnawing would remain as a principle. There would always be something, somewhere, wearing the world down. Time, decay, consequence, resentment. In some sense, Draugr is a name for that process. A face given to the slow collapse. A story used to explain why nothing stays whole forever. When you think of monsters, it is tempting to imagine a single night of terror, one encounter, one battle, one escape. But the Norse imagination also feared what happens over seasons, over generations. The long, slow weakening that no one notices until it is too late. A rope that frays in the dark. A roof beam that rots from the inside. A promise that is broken and never repaired. Draugr lives in that category. And because he lives there, he feels close. You do not need to be a god to understand the dread of something important being worn down without your knowledge. You do not need to stand beneath the world tree to understand what it means to live above hidden damage. The myth places the Nor beneath the cosmos as a reminder. The world holds, but it is not effortless. It holds because it is still being held. Because, for now, the strain has not exceeded the strength. And perhaps because certain beings, gods, creatures, fate itself, keep returning to the same question. How long can a structure endure when something never stops chewing? In the quiet of the longhouse, that question does not sound like philosophy. It sounds like winter. It sounds like the creak of timbers under snow. It sounds like the awareness that decay is not dramatic. It is steady. And somewhere beneath the roots of everything, the gnaw continues. Some doors are not meant to open. Not because something will leap out the moment the latch is lifted, but because opening the wrong door changes the air in the world. It changes how a place feels. It turns a boundary into a passage. In Norse mythology, the boundary between life and death is one of the most important and one of the most fragile. People die, bodies are washed, graves are dug, mounds are raised. The living do what they can to make the separation clean. But the myths never pretend that the separation is effortless. Death is not simply an absence. It is a region, a jurisdiction, a cold, ordered place where the dead go when they are not taken elsewhere. And it has a ruler, Hel. Her name is the same as her realm, which already tells you something about how she is understood. She is not merely a queen sitting in a distant hall. She is the idea of that hall made into a being. The old descriptions do not linger on her emotions. They do not give her speeches filled with anger or cruelty. They describe her presence the way they describe winter, directly without apology. She is associated with a body divided, half one way, half another. Not in a theatrical, monster movie sense, but in a symbolic one, a reminder that death is both familiar and alien. It comes from the same world as life, and yet it changes everything. If you imagine her hall, it does not glow with firelight. It does not smell of bread or mead. It is described as having names that feel like cold metal, thresholds, beds, walls, dishes, each labeled with a grim clarity. It is a place where nothing is rushed. A place where time is not a comfort. A place where the dead are not tortured for spectacle, but held in a state of permanence. This is what makes Hel unsettling. She does not need violence. She has authority. And the authority is absolute, because the one thing no one can bargain away forever is the fact that life ends. In these stories, Hel is not the opposite of the gods. She is part of the system. She receives what must be received. And in doing so, she embodies a kind of monstrous calm. Not the chaos of a beast tearing through a village, but the chill certainty of a door that closes and does not reopen. Yet even the underworld has borders. And borders, in Norse myth, attract guardians. There is a hound at the threshold, Garmar. The sources that mention him do not give long explanations. They do not build him up through detailed backstory. They offer him as an image, heavy, dangerous, and present. A watchful throat, a mouth built for warning. In some descriptions, his chest is stained with blood, as if the gate itself has teeth and the boundary has already been tested. Whether he is a single being or a title, whether he is identical to other underworld hounds or a separate creature, the mythic mood is consistent. Approach the gate and something will answer, not with words, with sound. A bark that is not simply noise, but a declaration. You are not welcome. For a human listener, that bark is more frightening than a roar. A roar belongs to the wild. A bark belongs to a guard. It implies rules. It implies enforcement. And it implies that the underworld is not a loose, chaotic pit. It is managed. It has doors. It has a keeper. It has a guard who makes sure the boundary is respected. In the human world, doors are comforting. They separate you from the weather, from predators, from strangers. In the underworld, doors are the opposite. They separate you from return. When Norse stories speak about journeys to Hel, they often feel less like epic adventures and more like administrative impossibilities. A traveler may reach the edge, may bargain, may plead, may argue. But the answer is usually the same: no. Not because hell is petty, because the system does not bend for longing. The dead belong where the dead belong. This is a very different kind of horror than the one found in battle. In battle, you can fight. You can run. You can pray. In the underworld, you can only accept. That acceptance is what makes hell monstrous to the living. Not monstrous in the sense of wickedness. Monstrous in the sense of finality. The underworld in Norse imagination is not only a place of punishment, it is also a place of sheer inevitability. Most people are not heroes taken to bright halls. Most people are not chosen by gods. Most people die, and they go to hell. This creates a quiet dread that is more universal than any battle fear. You can avoid a fight. You can avoid a storm. You cannot avoid the door. And because the door is unavoidable, the threshold becomes sacred. Burial practices matter. The handling of bodies matters. The words said over the dead matter, not because these things prevent death, but because they help the living maintain the boundary. They help keep the world separate. And this is where underworld guardians like Jörmungandr matter most. They are not only creatures. They are reminders. They embody the idea that there is a line you should not cross, and that the line has consequences. In a world filled with monsters that threaten from the outside, wolves, serpents, giants, the underworld offers a different kind of fear. A fear that comes from within the structure of reality. A fear that is as stable as stone. The living can build walls. The living can forge weapons. The living can even bind some monsters. But no one binds death. It stands at the center of hell's authority and at the throat of the hound who guards her gate. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it. Not a scream, not a battle cry, just a distant barking that carries up through the cold air of the world, reminding every living breath that the boundary is watched. And that one day, every traveler approaches the same door. There are monsters that live at the edge of the world. And then there are monsters that live close enough to touch. Not out in the deep ocean, not under the roots of the cosmos, but in the places where people farm, travel, and bury their dead. In Norse tradition, some of the most frightening beings are not distant and mythic. They are local. They belong to the same soil as the living. They rise from the same ground that grows grass. The old sagas speak of the dead in a way that is blunt. A body is not an empty shell. A body is a presence. It retains weight, shape, and consequence. It can hold stubbornness the way a stone holds cold. And if something in life was not settled, if a person was violent, greedy, proud, or simply unwilling to leave, then death does not always end that tension. This is where the draugr enters the Norse imagination. A draugr is not a ghost in the soft, translucent sense. It is not a drifting whisper. It is the dead made heavy. The sagas describe these beings as physical, as if death has thickened them rather than erased them. They can swell in the grave. They can grow large and strong, more like a force than a corpse. Their skin is often described as dark, sometimes bluish, sometimes blackened, like something waterlogged or winter burned. Their smell is not the smell of an old memory. It is the smell of a body that refuses to become only earth. What makes a draugr terrifying is not just that it moves. It is that it moves with intention. A draugr does not wander because it is lost. It acts because it wants. And what it wants is usually simple. To keep, to guard, to remain. Many draugr are tied to burial mounds, especially those that contain wealth, weapons, or objects the dead refuse to release. The mound becomes less like a grave and more like a fortress. The draugr inhabits it the way a landlord inhabits a property, defending ownership with violence. This creates a particular kind of dread in a community. It is one thing to fear a monster that lives far away. It is another to know that a mound on the edge of your land has become hostile. It changes how people walk. It changes how they speak. It changes what paths are taken after dark. The sagas often frame draugr encounters as practical problems, not cosmic mysteries. A draugr is bad for business. It kills livestock, it blocks travel, it frightens workers, it spreads illness and panic. And it does these things with a kind of brutal, stubborn consistency. A draugr does not need to chase every person. It only needs to be present enough to make everyone afraid. In some stories, draugrs sit on rooftops at night, heavy as stones, crushing beams, collapsing timbers, turning a home into a place that cannot rest. In others, they ride animals into exhaustion, leaving horses drenched with sweat and trembling, as if the dead have learned how to borrow the living for their own purposes. There are also tales where draugr drag the living from beds. Not in a dreamlike way, in a physical way. A hand closes around an ankle. A weight pins a chest. A voice that should not have breath speaks into the dark. The living struggle. And the struggle feels unfair. Because the draugr is not bound by the same limits. It does not tire the way a living person tires. It does not fear injury the way flesh fears injury. It can be wounded and still keep coming, driven by a desire that is no longer moderated by comfort, shame, or negotiation. The sagas also emphasize something deeply unsettling. A draugr can bring a kind of sickness, not always by biting or clawing, but by proximity. To be near such a being is to be exposed to rot and wrongness. Livestock grow thin, people become anxious, sleepless, tense. Fear itself spreads like smoke. This is important because it shows what these stories were doing. They were not merely entertaining. They were describing how a community feels when something is out of place and cannot be easily addressed. A draugr is the dead, refusing the social contract. The living bury the dead as an agreement. We will remember you, we will honor you, and you will stay where you belong. The draugr breaks this agreement. It insists on continuing. And in doing so, it becomes monstrous not only in body but in behavior. When a saga hero confronts a draugr, the confrontation often looks less like a duel and more like a wrestling match with winter itself. The draugr is cold. It is heavy. It is strong. It clings. Sometimes it fights with bare hands that feel like roots. Sometimes it uses weapons from its grave. Sometimes it simply uses its own mass, pressing the living down until breath becomes precious. These encounters are often described with strange, mundane detail. A doorway that splinters, a beam that cracks, a floor that shakes, the smell of earth, the sound of a body dragging. This kind of detail makes the horror feel close, like something that could happen on your own land if you anger the wrong dead. And that is the point. Because draugr are not only monsters, they are warnings. Do not bury someone carelessly. Do not break oaths. Do not hoard wealth so fiercely that it outlives your kindness. Do not treat the dead as if they are nothing. The sagas suggest, again and again, that the dead notice how they are handled. And if the dead are wronged, or if they were wrong in life, they may respond. So what do you do when the dead will not stay dead? The solutions in the sagas are harsh. There is no gentle exorcism. There is force. A community may open the mound. It may drag the body out. It may fight it. Sometimes the body is cut. Sometimes it is burned. Sometimes the head is removed. These actions are not described with delight. They are described as necessity, a second death, a final severing, a way to restore the boundary. And even then, the tone is never fully triumphant, because the existence of a draugr implies that safety is conditional. It implies that the ground beneath a village is not just soil. It is a layered place, filled with bodies and memories, and not all of them lie quietly. This is why draugr are among the most human-feeling monsters in the Norse tradition. They are not cosmic. They are personal. They emerge from ordinary places, and they turn those places uncanny. A familiar path becomes dangerous. A mound becomes a threat. A home becomes sleepless. In the quiet of the north, where the dead are buried close and winter keeps the earth hard, the idea of the restless dead carries a particular weight. It says, what you do in life matters. What you do after death matters. And the boundary you trust may be thinner than you think. Sometimes the monster is not a stranger. Sometimes it is the one you thought you had already laid to rest. Some fears do not live in the wilderness. They do not wait in the forest or rise from the sea. They enter the house. They arrive when the door is barred, when the hearth has burned down to coals, when the body is warm beneath blankets and the mind begins to drift. These fears do not need claws. They need only closeness. In the old northern world, sleep was not always a private, peaceful retreat. It was a vulnerable state. It was a soft boundary where the self could loosen, where dreams could carry a person far, where the body could be pinned by something that did not leave footprints. And so the Norse imagination developed monsters that fit the scale of the bedroom. They are not always called monsters in the same way as wolves or serpents, but they occupy the same territory in the mind, the territory of helplessness. One of the most enduring figures in this category is the Mara. Later traditions across the Germanic world describe the Mara as something that rides the sleeper, pressing down on the chest, stealing breath, turning rest into panic. The experience is intimate and terrifying, not because it is bloody, but because it is quiet. You wake. You know you are awake, and yet you cannot move. Your limbs feel distant. Your mouth will not form words. The air feels heavier than it should. And on you, on your ribs, on your lungs, there is weight. This is the kind of fear that makes people doubt themselves. It makes them question whether the threat was real or imagined, whether the house was truly safe, whether something can cross a threshold without opening a door. The Mara gives a name to that uncertainty. It turns a moment of paralysis into a presence. Not everyone who heard such stories would have experienced the sensation themselves, but the fact that the sensation exists at all is enough to make the myth believable. The body can betray you. The mind can wake before the muscles do. Breath can become difficult even when nothing is in the room. The myth makes sense of it. It says, something came. It says, something sat on you. It says, you were not alone. Whether the Mara is understood as a spirit, a curse, a malicious being, or the wandering shape of a person whose soul travels at night, the emotional effect is the same. Sleep becomes a threshold guarded only by trust, and trust can be broken. In older Norse ideas of the self, there is also the concept of shape, of form, of the way a being can present itself. A person is not only a body. A person can have a shape that can shift, a form that can be worn. In Old Norse tradition, the idea of hammer appears in tales of shape-shifting, stories where a person's outward form changes, where identity can become slippery, where the boundary of the skin is not absolute. These stories do not always treat shape-shifting as monstrous. Sometimes it is power. Sometimes it is craft. But it becomes monstrous when it is tied to loss of control, when a person becomes what they wear, when the animal shape takes over, when a human mind is swallowed by hunger, rage, or instinct. The image of the wolf skin appears in this context, the idea that to put on a hide is not merely to disguise yourself, but to step into another nature. If that nature is violent, the transformation is not a trick. It is a danger. And the danger is not only to others, it is to the one who changes. because to become something else is to risk not returning. This is a different kind of monster story than the ones that describe giants or dragons. It is not about an enemy outside. It is about the self becoming strange, about the possibility that identity is not as stable as you want it to be. And this ties back to the Mara, because both are rooted in the same fear, the fear that your body and mind can be entered, altered, or overridden. The bedroom is supposed to be safe. The skin is supposed to be yours. Sleep is supposed to be rest. These myths suggest otherwise. They suggest that the human being is porous, that the boundary between inside and outside can thin, that a spirit can press on the ribs, that an animal form can slip over the self like a garment, that something unseen can turn the most ordinary night into a struggle. In this way, these are some of the most intimate monsters in the Norse-related tradition. They do not require storms or prophecy. They require only a person lying still in the dark. They require only the moment when consciousness loosens and the world becomes less certain. And perhaps that is why they linger. A story about a world serpent is vast, but distant. A story about the dead rising is frightening, but it belongs to graveyards and mounds. A story about a thing that sits on your chest belongs to everyone, because everyone sleeps. And in the quiet of the north, where night can feel endless and the wind can sound like footsteps, it is easy to imagine that not all visitors need a key. Sometimes, the monster arrives on your breath. Sometimes, it arrives on your dreams. And sometimes, it arrives simply because the dark gives it permission to feel real. At the edge of the map, the world changes. Not in a dramatic flash, not with a signpost or a gate, but in the way the air feels thinner, the way paths stop being certain, the way the land grows rough and less willing to be crossed. In Norse imagination, the center of human life is small. A farm, a village, a fjord where boats can be pulled onto shore. Beyond that center, there is always an outside, and the outside is not empty. It is inhabited by beings that feel older than settlements and less interested in human comfort. Some are called giants, some are called trolls, some are simply called things in the night, shapes in stone, voices in wind, shadows that move with purpose. These are not always separate categories. The old words overlap. A giant is not only a towering humanoid. A troll is not only a fairy tale creature. In older Norse language, these terms can blur, sometimes pointing to the same kind of being, sometimes pointing to different moods of danger. What matters is the role they play. They belong to the margins. They live where the world is less domesticated. They are the reminder that human order is a thin layer spread over a landscape that does not need it. The giants, Jotnar, are some of the most complex beings in Norse myth. They are not always monsters in the way a serpent is a monster. Some are wise, some are foolish, some are beautiful, some are grotesque. But even when they are not hostile, they represent otherness. They represent the forces that existed before the gods built their halls, the raw material of the world that never fully agreed to become orderly. To be human is to live in a place carved from that rawness. To meet a giant is to meet the rawness itself. Many Jotnar are tied to particular landscapes. Frost giants belong to cold that kills. Not the picturesque cold of clean snow, but the cold that cracks skin and empties lungs. The cold that makes fingers useless and turns roads into traps. A frost giant is an embodiment of that cold. To imagine the cold as a being is not childish. It is practical. It gives the threat a face, and a face is easier to fear and respect. Fire giants belong to heat that destroys. Not the warmth of a hearth, but the flame that runs through dry grass, that leaps from roof to roof, that consumes stores and winter plans in a single night. In the Norse world, fire is both a gift and a terror. A being made of fire is the terror side of that truth. Then there are giants that feel less elemental and more uncanny. Giants who build, giants who bargain, giants who have strange bodies or strange habits. Sometimes they are described as enormous. Sometimes they are described as simply wrong. Too many limbs. Eyes that reflect light oddly. Voices that sound like stone grinding. The stories do not always need to spell out the horror. They rely on the human instinct that recognizes when something is not meant to be nearby. Trolls occupy a similar instinctive space. In later Scandinavian folklore, trolls become familiar figures, mountain dwellers, bridge haunters, creatures that turn to stone in sunlight. Older sources treat troll more as a word for a kind of dangerous being or magic. A troll can be a creature. A troll can be an act. A troll can be the name for a threat that does not fit neatly into other categories. What unites trolls in their many forms is their relationship to human boundaries. They come to the edge of farms. They linger near roads. They hide in places where people should not go alone. They do not live at the center. They haunt the transitions. Mountains are especially important in this landscape of fear. A mountain is not merely a pile of rock. It is a place where weather changes quickly, where sound echoes strangely, where a person can disappear without leaving a trace. To imagine a mountain as inhabited is natural. A cave mouth already looks like a throat. A dark crevice already looks like an eye. A boulder that resembles a hunched back already invites a story. In this way, trolls and giants are often treated as the land's own inhabitants. They belong there. Humans trespass. And trespass has a cost. This is why these monsters are so often connected to human arrogance. Not arrogance in the sense of prideful speech, but arrogance in the sense of assuming the world is yours. Assuming the forest is simply wood to be cut. Assuming the mountain is simply stone to be mined. Assuming the night is simply absence. The mythic outside reminds the human inside that these assumptions are fragile. There is also a quieter fear threaded through these beings, the fear of being watched. A person can walk a path and feel alone. But in the Norse imagination, the margins are populated. The tree line can hide eyes. The cliff face can conceal a doorway. A valley can carry voices that are not human. The stories do not always show a troll attacking. Often the threat is simply that the troll is there. That something inhabits the land that does not care about you. That the world is not built for your comfort. And that if you wander too far, you may not be able to talk your way back. This helps explain why Norse monster fear is so often geographical. It is tied to certain places, a certain ridge, a certain stretch of forest, a certain stone formation. The monster is not merely a character. It is the explanation for why people avoid a place. It is the name attached to a danger that might otherwise feel random. In the end, giants and trolls represent a simple truth. Human life depends on small pockets of order. Those pockets are defended by walls, by laws, by customs, by routines. But beyond the pockets, the world remains vast, and it remains alive with otherness. If you live long enough in the North, you learn to respect that otherness. You learn to keep to known paths when weather is bad. You learn to carry light. You learn not to speak too loudly at the wrong time. You learn that the land does not belong to you. It merely tolerates you. And somewhere beyond the last farm, in the rough places where stone rises and forests thicken, the old inhabitants remain. Whether you call them giants or trolls, whether you describe them as monstrous bodies or monstrous presences, they serve the same purpose. They stand at the edge of the map. and they remind the traveler that the map is not the same as the world. Some monsters are born, others are made. They begin as something human, something recognizable, and then, slowly, they become an object of fear. Not because they were cursed by lightning or pulled from a pit, but because a choice hardened into obsession. In Norse tradition, one of the clearest stories of becoming is the story of Fafnir. He is remembered as a dragon, a hoarder, a creature of venom and treasure. But he does not begin that way. He begins inside a family, a household where wealth arrives like a sickness, where gold carries a curse that clings to anyone who touches it. The details of the tale shift across poems and sagas, but the emotional shape remains. Something valuable enters a home, and it fractures the bonds inside it. Greed does not arrive as a roar. It arrives as a whisper, a quiet arithmetic. How much is mine? How much should be mine? How much will I lose if I let another person take it? Fafnir's transformation is the answer to those thoughts. When wealth becomes the only thing that feels safe, a person stops feeling like a person. They stop being willing to share, to trust, to live among others without suspicion. They withdraw. They harden. They become a guard for their own fear. In time, the story says, Fafnir becomes a dragon, not as a whimsical fantasy creature, but as the physical expression of what greed does. A body made to coil around treasure, a mouth made to warn away intruders, a poison breath that makes the air itself unsafe. If you imagine his lair, it is not merely a cave, it is a vault, a place where gold is piled like stones, where objects meant to circulate among people instead sit lifeless, locked in darkness. The hoard is bright, but the brightness is dead. No feasting, no trade, no gift-giving, only possession. In this way, the dragon is not merely an external monster. He is a portrait of what happens when ownership becomes worship. When a hero comes to kill such a creature, the conflict is not simply about bravery. It is about breaking a seal, about forcing what is locked away back into motion. The old story often frames the slaying as clever rather than glorious. The dragon is too strong to confront in a fair clash, so the hero approaches the lair with strategy, using the land itself, using timing, using patience. A pit is dug. A path is watched. The monster is anticipated rather than chased. When Fafnir moves, the ground trembles with the weight of something that was once human and is now pure threat. The air changes. The space around the hoard becomes a zone of danger. And then the moment comes. A strike from below. The dragon's body convulses. Blood pours. The story gives the dragon a voice at this point, which is important. Because even as a monster, Fafnir can speak. He can warn. He can accuse. He can describe the nature of the curse that clings to the hoard. In some versions, the hero tastes the dragon's blood, and with it comes a strange change, an expansion of perception. The world becomes sharper. Voices in the environment become intelligible. The story suggests that to defeat a monster like this is not only to win, it is to be altered. To touch cursed wealth is to risk becoming what it made. And so even in victory, the monster's shadow remains. The dragon is dead, but the hoard still waits. The temptation still glitters. The curse still clings. This is why Fafnir is such a powerful Norse monster. He is not only a threat in a cave. He is a warning about what humans can become. Yet Norse tradition also remembers monsters that are not born of human choices. Some belong to the sea. Not the world serpent that circles everything, but other immense beings described in later medieval texts and sea lore. Creatures that feel like the ocean itself wearing a body. There are tales of a being so vast that it resembles an island, a shape in the water that looks safe, a place to land, a place to rest, until it moves, until the island exhales, until the sailors realize the ground beneath them is alive. There are tales of a sea creature that lures fish and ships by opening its mouth like a bay, creating the illusion of shelter, even the illusion of a shoreline, and then closing. These images are not always found in the earliest poetic material, and when they appear, they often come through medieval writings that blend folklore, moral teaching, and wonder. But they still fit the Norse sea fear perfectly, because they transform the sea's greatest weapon, uncertainty, into a creature. They turn not knowing into jaws. They turn distance into appetite. For a sailor, this is the final kind of terror. Not being attacked by a monster you can see, but being fooled by the sea itself. Resting where you should not rest. Trusting a surface that is not solid. And then being taken. When you gather all these monsters together, wolves and serpents, gnawers of roots and restless dead, night riders and mountain dwellers, you begin to see a pattern. Norse monsters are not random. They represent pressure points. They gather around boundaries. They appear where humans try to control what cannot be fully controlled. The sea, death, greed, the edge of the known. They also reveal something else. They reveal that the Norse world is not built on the promise of safety. It is built on the practice of endurance. People survive by learning where danger lives, by respecting it, by negotiating with it when they can, and by preparing for it when they cannot. The monsters, in this sense, are part of the education. They teach the scale of the world. They teach the limits of strength. They teach the cost of obsession. They teach the shape of the unknown. And then, when the stories end, the night remains. The fire lowers. The wind moves outside. The world continues to hold, for now, with all its boundaries still under strain. If you've been listening in the dark, I hope these old shapes, these old fears, have begun to feel less like horror and more like landscape. Because that is what they were, a way to name what cannot be mastered, a way to admit the world is larger than any hall, a way to settle the mind by giving fear a form. And if you'd like more slow stories from myth and history, you can like this video, subscribe, and join me again for the next one. For now, rest. Let the night do what it does best. Let it grow quiet,